Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael Govan, the director of the museum. It's very nice to see you here this evening, and it should be a very nice conversation with, we're very lucky to have Thomas Demond here, whose work, Pacific Sun, is currently on view in BCAM. I'm sure you've all seen it there. And I don't know if everybody knows that that is a joint acquisition between LACMA and the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. So you'll see it again and again here and for a long time. So we're very, very, very happy to have that work in the collection. And Stephanie Barron, curator, is here who helped make that happen and focused on that. So I'm very happy to have Thomas here tonight and to have him in Los Angeles. Thomas was born in Munich, and now he divides his time between Berlin and this place of the Pacific Sun, Los Angeles, and teaches at the University of Fine Arts in Hamburg. He studied at the Kunstakademie Düsseldorf and received an MA also from Goldsmiths College in London. A very well-educated man. He is known, I think, as you know, for his cross-disciplinary practice, which includes sculpture, architecture, photography, and film. And curating, which we can talk about a little bit later. His works are in museum collections everywhere, U.S., Canada, Europe. And he was a Getty Research Institute in 2010. And he also co-curated When Attitude Becomes Form, Bern 1969, Venice 2013, at the Fondazione Prada, Venice in 2013. So he has a very far-ranging career, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. He's had solo exhibitions everywhere. And particularly one you shouldn't miss is at Matthew Mark's gallery in Los Angeles now. And I think Matthew is even here tonight. Matthew, it's great that you're here. Thank you, and thank you for your gallery in Los Angeles. And of course, he's been shown everywhere. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, National Gallery in Berlin, Neue National Gallery, the Serpentine, London, Fondazione Prada, in Dublin, in Paris, and has appeared in so many major exhibitions, including New Photography at MoMA in 1996, where I first saw it, Moving Pictures at the Guggenheim in New York and Bilbao, and also in Museum of Contemporary Canadian Art in Toronto. He represented Germany at the Biennale São Paulo in 2004 and has participated in the Venice Biennale in 2003, Shanghai Biennale in 2006, and Guangzhou Biennale in 2008. So we are really looking forward, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Thomas tonight. So please welcome artist Thomas Demond. Welcome, Thomas. It's so great to have you in Los Angeles and have you here, and it's been a pleasure to have you hanging around the museum, hanging around Los Angeles, and to have your work now on view. And I promised a few people a surprise beginning, right? We did.
Yeah, we did.
So why don't we're going to start with that, right? And then we'll have a little conversation. I have to say, so let's start with that. There, we don't need that. We know why we're here. So let's roll there. So what we're going to see, should we introduce what we're going to see?
Yeah, what we're going to
go ahead.
What we're going to see is like like an artwork, as you know, is always taking time, and in the end you never see the struggle. But during the whole thing, you never know whether it actually will, in this case, kind of reach a safe haven or not. And one of the big struggles I had up to the very last minute of showing it for the first time was actually the soundtrack. And because I thought, like, I'm here and I just would like to kind of try to find a soundtrack which, brings the piece into a totally different concept or something like that. Where, things like when you get nervous in the end, you think like you need that. But also I just really, I believe in collaboration, and I wanted to kind of work with fantastic musicians, like, and I was always baffled by a beautiful soundtrack of a film. So I'm here and I'm thinking, that would be quite interesting to do. And so I had a couple of soundtracks developed fully for the film, and in the end I decided to do something which I basically did together with a friend by myself, which, is now on view, which was the one which in the end I thought, like, this is, I got to do the whole thing myself. That's my deal. But the other two we never showed publicly, or like one I showed once, simply like one time, but like I thought like it would be quite interesting to see what the film does, which you have probably seen on the other end of the museum lot. what happens to the film when you have a completely different, audio world coming to it, which, I still, think like they're fantastic and I should have taken them, but, you just, at some point you have to let it go, and that's what it was. So, but tonight we show for the first and last time the 2 other versions.
World premiere and the last showing of the alternative, the B-side, the alternative versions.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. That was unexpected. I had never seen those before.
So the first one is
them.
T. Braxton, fantastic young musician, son of Anthony Braxton, the saxophonist, jazz musician. Amazing thing, it blew me away when I saw it, and I thought, really, wow. And then the second one is, and on this one it's also beautiful. On those two, you look at different things. Suddenly different the objects. You look at the attention goes to completely different objects. And then what I really like about that one, that it fades so into the black, and it keeps being a different reality, and you keep it very abstract from each other, like very distinct from each other. And the second one is Carter Burwell, which is also amazing piece of music, and it's he did soundtracks for all the Coen brother films and adaptation and all this. So, and I always loved his scores, and I thought, like, why not asking him? And for some reason he was curious, and then he sent me the thing, and I thought that would be, it was a really tough decision to go back to the original one.
Well, it does seem, because they're so beautiful, but so like any great film director or film editor knows that the sound deeply affects, there's this 60% rule, that 60% of the emotion somehow is driven by sound, and that your eye is driven, your emotions driven, it digs into you, which is why so much of certain film doesn't have sound, or why pictures have a different quality. So it does seem that you wanted to, in the end, you denied this lyrical quality that had a high production value in favor of something that is very handmade, right? I kind of know how you made the other soundtrack, but it's worth saying it's just sort of self-made, handmade. I think also, even when I think about the soundtrack you chose, I think like about maybe Sieberberg's Our Hitler, where those soundtracks are made of nothing, things clapping together, wood, and that somehow the artifice of the simplicity of those actually does seem to fit the artifice that you've made in your picture. So was that the simplicity of it? Was that what drove you to choose
at that point,
the final?
at that point I was panicking slightly, because I thought, like, I have everything done. Everything is so as I wanted it, and so many people helped me, and I just can't make a decision on this one. And then I thought, like, back, the original place where I came from, I thought, like, I need a soundtrack which just doesn't make it a silent movie. That's all I need, because it shouldn't be a silent movie. It just should have some sound. And sometimes I use that in other films, simply the projector. That's why the film projectors are so beautiful, because they're machines and they make sound. And if you have a looped film, for instance, the loop of the machinery is like, everything makes a rattle noise and something. So it's part of the film image. So, but in this case, obviously that wasn't an option, and I needed to find something which is just there, and doesn't even have to be synchronized. And so what I basically did, and maybe other people have heard this before, I went back to a friend I did a couple of sounds with, which is David Cunningham in London. He's famous for I Want Your Money by the Flying Lizards. The Japanese girl, I want your money, that's what I want. This amazing song. You should really kind of look it up. It's like 1978. So, but he's a fantastic guy, and we did the sound for Tunnel and other things together. And so basically, I sent him a box with oranges. I bought a box with oranges in LA. I sealed it up. I put it in the post. And I sent it over by normal post to England. And 3.5 weeks later, it arrived in his house. And I called him up, and he said, "Well, what am I supposed to do that?" And I said, "Like, leave it closed. Put a microphone on the side, and both sides, and just use it as an instrument, because by then, of course, the oranges would be moldy. It probably went on a ship to London as well. So, so it's kind of, it would have this, and then because what happens is also, like, the boat, of course, the waves don't go in a rhythm. They just go whenever the mass of the wave is next. So basically, he just shook. That's the ground structure, the backbone of that whole sound, which I have now, is like the shaking of the box according synchron to the movement of the objects on the thing. And then we added a few other things when it gets silent, of the, just throwing rice on the kitchen floor when the straws come in and stuff like that. But it felt like, in the end, I thought, like, this is not a melodrama. What I need as an artwork is, I need you to kind of have your decision. Is this a melodrama? Is this funny? Is this slapstick? And in the moment I give the sound, it's a clear arrow to, this is really happy, or this is a dream, or this is really sad, or this is tension or something. And that's what in the end, I thought, like, the artwork needs to be standing on its own and without my interpretation.
Well, and also, now that I've seen these, I see, what makes sense seems like it's the ambiguity that's so important. And the work, more than so many of your other work, seems to, it is so ambiguous. The reading is so ambiguous. And I think we're going to talk about other work you've made in relation to this, and maybe then we can come back to that topic of ambiguity. But also, for people here who have not had the chance to see or to learn about how it's made, do you mind? I think we were going to talk just a little bit about how you made this extraordinary short film.
So on the top right, you see like an animation which we did. Basically, the complexity of the original film, which is on the top left, is like you have a camera bolted on the back of a bar in a big ship, which is called the Pacific Sun, which was a perfectly fitting title. It's a ferry boat or a cruiser which goes regularly between New Zealand and Sydney. And it got into heavy weather, and suddenly, for one of those viral video moments where it gets on YouTube and everybody clicks on that. And I love the idea to have like a disaster movie, a short disaster movie, but not being authentic by the camera being shaken, because that's usually the sign for like, oh yeah, this is authentic. So basically, all you see is like you see the object, the translation of the big disaster into the objects and the people on the boat. So if you press the next one more. I think it starts in the top left. So, and then we just had to, but I didn't know if I leave out the people, what happens? Do you kind of interpret the whole thing as a wave, or do you think of it as a box or like a big fan or wind or something like that? So I needed to kind of find out what happens without people, and how many objects do I need, and what are the objects doing at any given point in the whole thing. And I found fantastic support in LA, which that's the city for doing that. And so we translated everything in a computer version of the film, according to the sculptures I made during the same time. And then we did a whole, we had a script to kind of know which object, which chair is doing what at what given point. And then we could kind of, we had like 12 animators, heroes in my, understanding, which would basically, spend all the time going through the script together. Like you needed a script, so otherwise you have 12 different waves and objects, 600 and something objects. And we would we would go together through the whole thing, and you see, him like moving it. And every day you couldn't see that but on the real picture you can see little marks next to the chair. So in the evening we would have 16 frames or 18 frames, and then we would erase them. So for 3.5 months we wouldn't do anything else and move every object in the film by hand, stop motion, make a photograph, next one, stop motion, and everything together. So basically when you have the big heaps, it's a huge heap which has to slowly move over the course of a week. It's just like. But the beauty of like doing a choreography like Disney did with like, when the broomstick walks down with the water cans, and stuff like that, that kind of quality I wanted. And I thought the place where I would get it would be here. And I without the team, and that's a new experience for me too, that you have a team which does much more than you could ever do yourself, because before that it's all, you and your assistants in the studio, but this was just, unbelievable support.
Well, it seems so essential, too, that it is a series of photographs, right? That's what it is. And just to make it really clear, how many photographs a day did you make?
Well, we kind of, sometimes we had like a good run and we had like 200 or something, but most of the time.
The total number is?
2,700.
So just for everybody to contemplate that. Thousands of individual photographs that make that. And of course, there's the making of the objects. And just for those of you who aren't as familiar with Thomas's work, there's the making of each object as a sculpture, right, which is measured and organized and made in paper, cardboard. And I mean, what a huge undertaking.
And everything in life size, that's probably also important
right.
to know.
And so it is life size, because I think some people think, oh, it's easier to make it as a model, it's CGI, it's whatever. But this is the most laborious process I think you could ever imagine. And in fact, rather than even use real materials or any kind of CGI, it's all objects moved
Well, we
slowly.
had to use some CGI in the end, which I have to say, which was a real bummer, because like everything, every movement, every object you see is actually moved by hand and then photographed, and and all together, not like single objects and then put together in a composite or something. And it has a certain kind of team spirit in the end, that you want to get this going. And we were planning for 2 months, and it took us 3.5 months, and everybody skipped this holiday, and like angry girlfriends on the phone and stuff. So and then they were kind of started to work from 6 to 12 at night, which kind of makes the potential of like making a mistake even bigger, because if you forget one plate in the middle, you have to go back to that frame where everything was still one common movement. So, but then we had always had like problems with aligning, and we thought like we're not going to see them, it's going to be fine, in the morning when you kind of start the next one. And what it was these tiny little earthquakes which happen every day. And so we didn't have to do much on the objects. What we had to do was the column and the back room, and all these things were just suddenly moving, and and you looked at it and you thought, ooh, this is really heavy, you know. So, and that's what we needed suddenly, not CGI, but we needed to kind of stabilize the architecture, which nobody expected. That's LA as well, you know.
Well, what a huge undertaking. Now, and so we're going to talk a little about the content too, because so many of your works are charged with some particular event, some politics, some real disaster. I mean, something, and I had the best time selecting images for this talk. Maybe there are too many and we'll have to speed through some of them, but Thomas made 2 huge books. So it was walking through all these works, some of which I knew, very few of which I didn't know, but I tried to select some works that somehow seemed to relate backwards to this piece. And so I'm wondering, we're going to go through a little bit of your career, but with a specific idea about this piece, because of course then I looked through your work and I saw this picture from 1994, and it seemed absolutely relevant, and its opposite, because this is 1994, and this is the attempted murder of Hitler, right? And this is very, as most of your work is, or often is, this very charged scene with content, which is then left abstracted, absent of people, with the residue, again, reconstructed, remade, so there's a further abstraction. And then this chaos. And of course, you know, knowing that, you read this in a certain way. When you read The Pacific Sun, at first, when I saw it, I thought, well, this must be some horrific event. And then it dawns on you as you watch it that, and I find out later, that nothing happens. Nothing bad happens to anyone. It's absolutely ambiguous. And we can talk about later, it's rereading. But it seems that was a particular intention, that having made works like this, Pacific Sun is a sort of opposite of that in its ambiguity.
It is, but like what links the two is like the status of the image, in a sense, you know, because I, you know, say in a way, I don't have to say anything. I don't have to add anything new to the Holocaust or the Third Reich or something, because I wasn't there. I don't know anything about it. All I know is that I grew up with the images of that, and the argumentation around the images for which the images were crucial, you know. And in this case, it was like it's the first one I actually used anybody else's photographs for. And I grew up in German history books, you would always see that picture of that devastation there in the bunker in Poland where Hitler was hiding, and you know, and you have the Tom Cruise guy who comes in and tries to kind of kill him, basically. But you know, all this is kind of the idea of like our world is kind of, you know, bombarded by images, and we kind of read the world through looking at the images of things, and some of them have come in the framework of a really important argument, which was this one. So when I was a student in Goldsmith and I made this work, I just thought, like, you know, I should be the product of the education which needed this picture to show us that there is another way too. And am I or not, you know? And so I thought, like, by trying to kind of redo that image which I grew up with, and literally you would see it in your history book like year after year, you know, all the time it would be part of the German education. I thought like that would be kind of trying to kind of make sense of, you know, an image which has been embedded in my upbringing more than, and just beyond the fact that I can say I don't like the image, you know, or this is a great image or whatever. That's not even the point. It's just like, this is an essential part. You just, you know, essential part is other people have holiday images or something. So in Germany, that was part, you know, that was so I thought like that was quite interesting. And in a sense, like, you know, I don't want to level the differences between the pictures, but like Pacific Sun is a picture, you would never know about this. And there is like 50,000 waves like this, you know, at this very moment on all the oceans of the world. But for some reason, we organized the technology which kind of gives us note about all trivia and all important and less important things in the world to kind of let us share, you know, and that sharing part is like our individuality. That is, you know, how we define ourselves. We know about, you know, the horrible videos about ISIS, even if I would never do anything about that. But it's just, you know, like that is defining where we are, when we're living, and how we kind of find our own place. Not only these videos, it's also like the Oscars, you know, which dress does she wear and stuff. But all that stuff is kind of contributing to our individuality much more than maybe 40 years ago or 20 years ago, or when I was a student, you know. So I thought, you know, that's where the link is probably between the two, or maybe some other works here.
And what about the difference in the sense that, well, we've talked about how Pacific Sun is an LA work, but what about the fact that is it that it's in LA, it can be content free? Is there something about Los Angeles being, just for you personally, being away from the history-laden space?
I have
of
been
Germany?
warned
Can
by
I
my
get
German friends I will be kind of turn into a marshmallow when I'm staying.
So
if
you've
I
heard
stay here
it here.
too
This
long.
is what happens to artists who move to LA. They lose their.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but like I think I got a. I mean, the work you just can't, you don't make a plan. It comes out and you just look at it and you think like, now I have a piece up in Matthew's gallery which is like cherry blossom trees, which is a very different thing from this one. So, and you think like, but the cherry blossoms come from a picture which is also quite heavy, but it, so I don't know what it does to you.
We'll examine the unconscious a little bit later, but I want to ask you too, and we're spending some time on this in the beginning, but when there's a lot of labor in this. So when you make a picture like this and you're at Goldsmith, there's a meditation in making, right? There's a time, and it is a process for you of meditation, is it not, on the subject?
It's a little bit, but meditation sounds like yoga. It's more like you spend time on yoga is great, but you spend time on something, and that kind of, you clear your mind just doing that and nothing else, And I mean, in this one, I didn't even know how to do this, and now I'm just looking at the picture and I'm trying to kind of imagine how the things have been looking in the real world, which is an aspect which is actually quite interesting sometimes, because you realize you have the same Tupperware as Saddam Hussein has in his kitchen. But here obviously there wasn't much intersection between my life and his life. But you just try to imagine how the space was, and at this point, I just thought like, okay, I'm just do it completely photographically. I take a slide projector, and I project it onto there is a picture which has no damage at all, because there are also pictures of the bunker before the blast, And I thought I could do it that way, and of course it was a complete mistake. Didn't work at all, So I thought like, then I make a drawing on the corner, and of course the corner goes like, like all the way through that. That never works like that. So that was a quite important thing to just you have to kind of just throw everything through your own imagination and your own experience of like being in a space, and that takes time, But like if you look at if you look like a master painting, you just never ask yourself how long did he paint on that one.
Right. But I'm thinking about the process of that this kind of consideration of a subject is part of the work. It's part of life. I picked a few things just to show. I was interested. I was looking back. So this is we're 20 years ago. Of course, now we all take for granted that photography is fiction. But in the 70s into the 80s, there's this relationship. Of course, you can think of Susan Sontag, but you can think of photography as truth. And of course, this all changes, and now we, I think, take it completely for granted with digital photography as nearly painting. But you're right on the edge of considering that, right? This is a moment in the 90s where that transition of thinking, even if the technology is not there, is happening, I think, in photography.
Well, there's also the transition of like the photographic image kind of dissolves into some virtual reality image, So computer-generated images would be so good that you can't tell the difference anymore. So basically, you're getting exposed to things which it's not about the doubt so much. It's more like we are familiar with the fact that you can make any picture you want, Not so much, it doesn't have to be the kind of one-to-one relation between the front and the back of the lens. And so when I made this one, which is earlier than the space, I had a photograph of a nuclear power plant, which was exactly next to the highway where I would always go home from Düsseldorf. And I just had this kind of, dream. There's another picture of this one which I hardly ever show, because I don't even have, I think I have a print, but it says big demand on it, like with big yellow letters, and it looks like the style icon, So I just had this kind of, I thought it looked so much like ambition, that thing. Yeah. And I just was tempted to kind of try out. And it's kind of, this is also banal. It's just like a power plant, but like it has this kind of blocky self-confidence, which I really find quite intriguing. But that's one of the few things which when I still did things like which weren't in life size, obviously. So
yeah. I did read Germany in this too. There's
it's Germany. It's West Germany,
right?
Yeah,
exactly. I think we're gonna we'll move along. I loved this desk because I think very early on, because this is 94 too, you're going from the factory of the very large scale to the intimacy of the desk. And I think that many people watching the film here are looking at the milk carton or focus on the computer or the little piece of paper. And there's that strange sense of the intimacy of that abstraction where, of course, a piece of paper becomes almost paper as you have it, and that range of expression. But also maybe just to say memory and imagination, because sometimes it's described, oh, well, you exactly copied the scene. But of course, that's almost never true.
No, never true.
And this work is a kind of exercise in memory, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I just, I was sitting in London feeling a little homesick, and I thought maybe I can make something of that. And so I thought, like, I had this kind of, I was thinking about architecture. What is like if you remember architecture, what do you remember? Like,
what is the memory of a
exactly?
space?
And do you remember like general notions of architecture? The staircase, the balcony. Is there something like how do we kind of recognize a staircase as such? Because like it has we have an ideal staircase in mind. Is it like a memory, a personal memory, or is it more like because it has stairs and a railing or something? So. And I thought about numbering the 5 staircases, which I could remember at the time. One of the one I liked the most, or like the most, I have the most memories to, is like the one of my school. And so basically I started rebuilding. This is in life size. It's built sideways because my studio wasn't high enough. But so I rebuilt the staircase of my school, and as everything I could remember, but not anything else. I couldn't remember how the doors looked like. I still don't know how the doors look like, and I couldn't. A couple of other things which are always kind of the furniture of a place, like a public place like this. I didn't know anymore, so I left. This is just my memory, picture from the memory. Do you have pictures in your head or not? That's the question in the back of this. And then, 15 years later, I go to a school reunion and I go, now I'm going to check out the staircase. And I see the staircase, it's still there, and it's a round staircase. And, and you think like, really? And it makes total sense, because one of the features of the staircase is you could slide from the top to the bottom. And that's what I remembered about it. But it always was, it never occurred to me. So.
Well, I think when I first saw your work and I saw the form of using paper and models in actual size, I actually thought it was memory, like that. And I started introspecting about my own memory, and maybe that's the way my memory looks. Like slightly, I don't know how your memories look, but this may be slightly abstracted with details not filled in. It would be like making a paper model memory.
Well, it's also like it looks familiar, and your memories kind of by definition feel familiar to you. So you never, and the memory is a filter. Otherwise, you would go bonkers. So you filter out the things you don't know. Every picture, when I say the Lady Dice Tunnel, you remember a place, but like the picture is being constructed in your head when we talk about this. And so we don't have any, obviously, don't pictures in a drawer in our head or something. But so every time you just reconstruct that picture, you just lose something. And in the end, it becomes much more like detail-less. It's becoming this kind of, generic place, but also it still carries the specificity of like why you remember it. And that's what I think, like what I'm trying to do with some of the things, like when they're not too elaborate, like, like this one, for instance, I would try to kind of come to that point where everything is there, what you need to have this kind of point in your brain, embedded in your memories, but like not more than that. So,
and I think then also when you deal with larger topics, maybe you're after some sense of what collective memory might look like, and not to draw too fine a point on maybe the difference between Pacific Sun and the unconscious that makes that in Los Angeles. I'm driving that home with Lenny Riefenstahl's archive of film, just to connect also to the film, but the sort of opposite of this problematic of a German consciousness, right? And film's role.
There are 2 things in there. One of them is like I started with an idea, like a very plain idea, and the plain idea is, coming to the memory part first, maybe. The memory part is like you have many of your memories, as I said before, they are actually not personal experiences. They're memories somebody told you. and that makes you a person now, living now and not like 100 years ago. So in the end, these things become our memories. So if I have seen a photograph, or if I know about Leni Riefenstahl, or I've seen pictures of a film archive, even if I have never seen a real one, like even more like with places like a grotto, many people have never been in a grotto, and they still know when they see one what a grotto is, and so they become part of your, basically you need them, otherwise you don't know how to find your way in a town, but then in our world. But then the other thing is, I started with a very simple abstract things, like the repetition of the same object. And the repetition of the same object is something pop art, for instance, kind of celebrates very much for obvious reasons, like, Campbell cans and, all that. But then what does it do to you is like it gives you the pleasure of having more than one. And like, there's the plentifulness or something. And then Agnes Martin, if you think it's the same, if you think of Donald Judd. So it's not even like, linked to pop art in general. It's just like a pattern of composition, and I wanted to work with that. And the pattern of composition, and then I tried different kind of forms of storage, and most of them were either too blank or like they were too specific. I don't want to go into details, but like, and then I came across the film archive of Leni Riefenstahl, and I thought it's perfect because it's a very specific container. It could be designer pizza, but like everybody knows, it's film boxes. But you don't need to see the boxes for the film. You just know what it will be, and you have the subterraneous kind of feeling of the ladder. You have the shelf, very simple. You can make it a very simple picture and have it, have all the mystery of what's in these boxes in a very light way on the picture without like being too didactic or too obvious or something. And that's how I came to that. And then I knew that's the right thing.
Well, and what's interesting is you're using artifice or surface to suggest things by suggesting them much more deeply, right? Because the imagination is more powerful than the ability to picture something. And I think that it's a very interesting use of artifice. I want to just show a range of work that gets us to more contemporary work, to show some of the playfulness that I just picked out in thinking about this, because color obviously emerges occasionally strongly in your work, and this again is imagination. So this is What's My Line?
In German, yeah.
Which of course you would have seen in black and white on television, but here you've created it and photographed it in color, so we see the color set that we don't see in the television version, which is again a play with what's there and what's not there, and what we remember and what might be reality behind that sketch, right?
But it's also like a really simple solution. I don't want to do black and white photography, so what do you do?
Right, and it's off television. And this was on the cover of one of your catalogs, your ability to deal with abstraction in a window, which is, I think, such an important element of your work, the abstraction of things. Or I'm always fascinated how you'll take on subjects like and I don't know if this was a commission. This is a work for this is the Porsche headquarters, right? This kind of sense of a company that has a world map because they're global.
Yeah, it's more like I had a girlfriend at the time who was a patent attorney, and she needed a car, and so I didn't have any money, so I drove an old shit car. But like basically, I talked her into buying a Porsche, which she didn't need it. And so to make it really cheap, I said, like, let's not get anything more than you just absolutely need, So we kind of go and pick it up ourselves. That's like 300 euros less or something. And she kind of bought it in. And so we went to the Porsche thing, and of course it wasn't ready, or we were too early or whatever, which is a tiny little, at that time it wasn't a car center as you kind of think of it. It was like a really kind of banal little room with chairs, but at the end of them there was this big map which was basically representing what a worldwide operation Porsche is, which I loved because every company would like to have that, so you just I want to have that, so I am a worldwide competitor or something. And I thought, like, this kind of on one hand is so simple as an object, and it's so but the connotation which comes along with these shapes is just global, it's just grand. So and that was basically what I thought, like, but it doesn't have to do much with Porsche in the end.
No, right, it's a generic. So you're finding this commonality in an image that gets abstracted in that sense, or you dig down. It's interesting, this focus on corporations. This is the BMW Sound Lab, right, where they make those weird sound, those perfect sounds, and they labor and labor and labor as much as you did on that film just to make that 1 second sound when the ignition turns on or something happens, right?
Yeah, well, but and this is like First of all, it's a picture of computer, like a total abstraction, because the echo-free chamber, which this is, car companies started using them in the 70s, and they used them to basically simulate a landscape, a car really driving fast through a landscape, but not the car isn't driving, because if you do it in the landscape, sometimes there's more leaves on the trees, sometimes it has been raining 2 days ago, so the results you get are always kind of completely different, and so they hated nature in that sense, and so basically they put the car in an enclosed room and had little rolls, and so it would speed along, and the microphones would go in the speed backwards in the speed of what was on the whatever, how you call it, like the speedometer. But this came basically because a friend of mine, I had this commission, they called and said, like, we want to do a work with you, BMW, can we, new photography or whatever. And I called a friend, Andreas Gursky, and said, like, look, I never did this before, isn't that selling out and stuff? And then he said, like, well, depends on what you do, but like, you should do it because you never know what's coming out of a commission like that. And I thought, I have a certain affiliation with cars. I thought, like, well, then at least I want to kind of see what they're about to do in the future. And I said, I only do it under the condition that I can see your most secret the most secret places in your whole company. And to my surprise, they would say yes, And I kind of saw all the cars of like which only came out like 3, 4, 5 years later or something, and one of them was being tested in that space, and I never have seen a space like this, and I thought, wow, this is really quite amazing. This is a landscape according to sound engineers, in which that's level of abstraction, and then it's about model. It's the model of a landscape, and I'm dealing with models, and that was what kind of totally brought me in. And I didn't have to show a piece of car either.
Well, and this is the segment of work I was thinking about in terms of abstraction. Here's a moving image. These are rare in your work, but I think that, for me, perfectly defines the kind of question of a moving image. In fact, if there's a film reel that continues, here's an escalator going up, an escalator coming down, you have the handrails moving almost like the reel of a film, perhaps.
Yeah, that's the idea, exactly. Yeah. And it's a loop, it's a perfect loop.
Right. So you have the perfect loop. And then going to nature, this was the Venice project. I know I want to get to some of the newer images, so I want to move through a range of things just to prove that you do nature. It's not just non-nature.
Yeah, this one is actually a cliché. It's kind of, we made this like out of a big number of leaves, but it's not like based on a real whatever forest. It's just a cliché, and I thought, like, can you get away with making something which is so overloaded with your inspirational experiences, like the inspirational poster at home or something? Can you get away with this and still make it an artwork which has a certain power in its own? And that's what the try was on this one.
Well, the blankness, that kind of notion of the collective image, that things that you feel, I found it very powerful here in this image, because who hasn't seen the image of somebody coming out of an airplane, an important person? It's a funeral, somebody's died, somebody's important, and all you can think of is the ceremony of that. Here you've left it, I think, most powerfully without people.
It's a
you
stage.
Cannot imagine the people in it.
You see it every day, Air Force One or Air Force Two. If you go on a news clicker and you just you want to see a plane landing, you just have one every day because of the 2 presidential planes. That's very simple. So it's kind of a news feed of like landing here, landing there, and then the only thing which changes is the staircase coming up.
Right. And while I think this is abstracted from the Beatles' arrival, this generic quality of us being able to fill in the person, and the missing person, of course, is so much of photography is about people. The missing people seems to be such an issue in your work, which I think becomes most explicit in this, which relates to me directly to the Pacific Sun piece, which is Ghost, right?
Yeah.
Here things are flying in the air. This is from an actual supposed news photograph, a photograph of a ghost.
That's a tabloid magazine in England, and it was like the first time a ghost was being photographed, and I thought that's easy, But basically, there is a stick, and if you see the photograph, you can even see the photograph, the stick behind the scissors. There's like 3 sticks coming from the back of that wall, and then I switched my heater on, which is a ventilation thing on the top. So basically, and then that makes a blur. It's very simple. It's so simple. But the most tricky thing is actually not that. The trickiest thing for me was the photograph in the photograph, which is the photograph of the mountain there. So I built a box behind there to have a photograph of, you have the real thing, because I didn't want to have a print on the, I didn't want to have a print on my print, you know. So basically I built a frame, I built a hole behind there, and then I had a mountain made out of glassine paper and a little kind of extra light on the side, just to have the whole thing going through. That was more.
I think you need to spend more time on your work with the focus on the details.
Me?
Because
I spend enough time on my work, just trust me.
But the theme of the ghost, I saw this picture, reminded me that that's a theme that carries through so much of your work, the missing person, the ghost. And even in Pacific Sun, is it a ghost that is the motion of that? I couldn't help but select these images from the 2004 Kunsthaus Bregenz show to talk about two things. One, this is done in the museum that Peter Zumthor designed in Bregenz, and I'm interested in your thoughts about working in this museum, having never talked to you about that, but also to think about installation, because you've had occasions where you've created installation, that every installation of your work is sculptural, it is physical, and you have to do it in space, and you're so sensitive to architecture, obviously.
Well, you know, like I have to say my work kind of takes a really long time, and so we kind of browse through the works, but like I have never managed to do more than 5 works a year. And so if you're invited to a show somewhere, it's very simple. You have like, you know, you have to find a way of showing the limited number of works you have in a constellation which kind of, you know, interests yourself. And then you come very clear, and then, you know, most of the modern contemporary museums actually have like so much, you know, rhetorics about them that you have to find a solution to adapt to them. And the first time I had to do that was in Fondation Cartier, which is a Jean Nouvel building. And that looks like a vitrine. It's all glass, you know, which I had later on in the National Gallery again. So I have to find a solution for how to kind of manage to not change my work, because the architect 10 years ago wanted me to change it or something. And how can I still kind of do my work without blending out, whether with a white box or a red box or whatever, blending out the architecture. And so I had to find solutions for these things for the photographs I do. And then and in Bregenz, it's a great building. It has like 3 floors. It's a great, very challenging building, but it's like an opera. It's like a late 19th century opera. You come in, you have the grand, you know, the first, like the film Pacific Sun, when the first movement of the chairs coming in, that's basically like the prelude to the whole thing, and it's a grand place. And the director wanted me to show a film there. And I thought, like, how can I do this? And there are like hidden, you know, to blank out the light in the foyer to have like speeches and stuff. And they're hidden, but they're never used because they actually only covered half of the whole thing, and most of the light comes through the back window. So basically, you really use them very much. So what I did, I took the trail, like the tracks of that curtain, and I made 2 rounds, which kind of meet in the middle and kind of describe a space. And it would come in, the whole cycle would take 12 minutes, it would come in, show the film here for like a minute, and then go out again. And of course, the film has the same movement of the curtains, just to make a space. And then the thing is, like with the 3 floors, what I said about the building is like you have to come down the same staircase as you walked up. And so I wanted to make sure that if people come down the show, they would not see the same setting as when they came up, basically that little, you know. And also like when you come in and it's cold in Bregenz, it's like, you know, it's in the middle of the Alps. You kind of, the reminder of that big curtain out of felt, it would kind of give you the idea when you come into a Gasthof or something, you know, like in a restaurant, and you have the little curtain which you have in cold areas and stuff like that. And then the second floor, I just wanted to do something with that space, and I convinced them to put these concrete walls hanging from the ceiling. The place can actually kind of take anything because it's full concrete. You never see the daylight from the outside, and so you have this full concrete like enclosure. And I wanted to work with that because like the trouble, and you might face the same trouble, but you might, you know, of course it's Zumthor's first museum, so you might kind of design it now differently. One of the troubles of this, you walk on staircase up, then you come in a room, and you see the entire room from one, you know. And if you want to build a wall, it looks stupid because you can't build a concrete wall. And so that's why I kind of came to a concrete wall. I wanted to have exactly the same concrete as on the other walls, just to kind of get a division in the space. And but for making a show, it's always problematic if you see everything at once, because you cannot build up a trajectory of images or So have you got one more? No. Yeah, then you come around and you see like the clearing as a picture, and then a facade, which is basically a pun on the concrete wall. So facade is kind of from East Germany, like a one of those social, the communist kind of decorations, public decorations.
Well, and you've made artifice of the building by extending the concrete walls into the space to make a new architecture. I think
it was quite amazing because you don't want to put your hand underneath the wall because you just realize how heavy it is, and But on the other hand, kids would do that and put their legs on.
It's amazing how that glass ceiling holds that concrete wall. It's a quite ingenious
this is
construction.
yeah.
So let's talk about the U.S. So you've a lot of these images have been of Germany, but you've you've looked at different things. I thought this was one of the most stunning images in terms of that shared unconscious, because this is Gate 2004, but this relates, I guess, to the haunting security process post 9/11, and the homage we're left to of that is airport security somehow.
Yeah, well, there's Portland, Maine, the airport, where like two of the hijackers of the 9/11 plane went on, and these are technologies of visibility, like making things visible which you can't see otherwise. And they walk through, nothing happens, nobody is kind of, and that's at the same time that was the police photograph later on for and with all the search warrants and everything. So that is and then at the same time it is the last moment when that whole idea of the world as we knew it beforehand was still that's the last moment being recorded, which was when the world was okay. And I thought, somehow things change, especially in the world of pictures. It's a real a turning point, like 9/11. But on the other hand, as an artist, I can't. That whole issue is way too big, and I haven't seen a successful artwork about 9/11 or like the consequences of 9/11. Because it's just too big. It's just too big as an issue. It's very, very hard to kind of, there's like, I can't say anything, add anything to that which hasn't been written extensively all over the place. So as an artist, you just try to kind of make, you want to commit yourself to your time, but on the other hand, you don't want to be speculative or too speculative about things. So that moment was the last moment when things were in a way as they should be. And that's what I found very intriguing about that. And it's kind of the CCTV camera, so it should be preventing all what happens, but it can't because it just makes a picture.
Right. That picture making quality. I want to go from that to the one of the most complicated things, and this brings us kind of to the present in the sense that this grotto is you just told me is being made for permanent installation at the Prada Foundation. The new building that's in Milan, right? So it's a remaking?
No, it's the original thing.
Replacing it.
Yeah, well, I had never kind of showed my objects, never. Once I did with a huge mistake, but that's another director's talk, But I missed the point of like taking something out. In this case, it was 36 tons heavy, so that's why I didn't take it out in time. And I had so many deadlines, and half a year later, that thing, which is completely built out of layers of cardboard on top of each other, is like, and they computer kind of cut by by digital scissors. It's all computer designed, but then by hand assembled and cut and everything. And so I still had this monster standing in my studio, and I thought I missed the point of throwing it away, and it doesn't rot either because it's solid, other than all the other things. So I missed the point. And then I had a show with Miuccia Prada in her foundation in Venice, I don't know, a couple of years ago, where I thought, okay, if I still have it, I need to get it out of the way. And I gave it to her, and we installed the photograph, and then in the next room, all the things necessary for the photograph, and then the object. But not the photograph next to the object. So it's
in a separate room.
It's just a separate room, and it's just basically, it doesn't kind of end up chronologically. So it's not the material first, then the object, then the photograph, because it's not really about the comparison between photographs and objects. But then we didn't know what to do with it, and she said, well, we have to get it out here because that's a rented place in Venice. we put it in storage, and then some point a year later she asked me that she's building the thing without what would I do with the grotto, and I said, look, I give it to you for free, you can have it, you cannot sell it, you just, it's, you know, like you have a permanent loan, but they, you know, the only thing I want is like that if we show it, it has to be in a way like the Earth Room by Walter de Maria, that you just, you know, it's there, but you can go on a Wednesday after, I don't know what the opening times are, but like you can go if you want to, but you don't have to. So, and then, you know, not having it thrown away, it's still perfectly fine. I thought, like, now she's kind of building, there is a basement, they build a basement just for that thing. And so, you know, it's in Milano if you want to go see the real thing. So, and that's the...
So is this a great, do you have the temptation when you've spent all this time constructing things like this to keep them? And is that a crisis to destroy the work, the paper model, all that you've made? I know you've given some away. I know... Is there a...
No, I haven't given some away. I mean, you know, I'm trying to kind of really get them out of the way. I just throw them away.
You throw them away.
Yeah, and
there's no crisis in that.
Well, yeah, that's what I have assistants for, you know. I have to leave. I'm sorry, I have a really important appointment, you know, and so I go, and 2 hours later the whole thing is gone. Okay. No, but the thing is, like, you know, I have to admit it gets harder over the years. You know,
we'll be able to see this in Milan then with the picture in another room, but to see the actual construction, which I am dying to see since I've never seen it. I wanted just last few slides just to bring us right to the present, because I know time is short, but I picked this one because of the theme of the thing broken and also the theme of the museum. This is this incredible vase, Chinese vase, ancient thing that was broken in the museum and then reconstructed perfectly so that no museum visitor can tell that it's broken. And then here you've given it back its broken state by, I guess, measuring and figuring out how to represent that moment from the photograph of its being shattered.
Well, what the museum is basically doing in a way is like taking time, you know, fate out of taking the time out of the curse of normal things.
Right.
It takes, you know, it gives it shelter basically. And this kind of vase was standing on the windowsill for like 250 years, a Ming vase, and nobody ever, you know, touched it. And it was fine with 2 others next to it. And it's in Cambridge. And at some point, somebody wanted to go from the ceramic, from the porcelain wing to the painting wing, and realizes this is not the right way. He turns around and apparently kind of fell over his shoelaces. Timothy Potts, which is the director of the Getty Museum, kind of claims that was a whole total stunt. You know, he wanted to fall into these vases, but like for the museum, it was all over the place, and then it was just a disaster. And at the same time as they try to take away the fate of that vase and make it invisible, so basically press the rewind button, I thought, like, I want to reconstruct the incident, you know, which took me roughly the same time, which is 2.5 months. And I found this kind of quite interesting for the museum, for like the state of the museum, but because hopefully I was hoping that they would actually buy it, but they never did. But like, you know, like, so it would be a nice reverse kind of thinking.
I want to recommend they do, because it's almost like it gives it, like the large glass was broken on the way to Philadelphia, gives us to have this work with the vase seems to give it life, gives it a greater story. And I love that it took as much time to make the broken version as the fixed version. So talking about truth and also media and the problematic of the photograph, you were commissioned to make this cover of the New York Times Magazine, in which you made a photograph that, of course, we immediately see New York Times Magazine and a photograph of the president's office, and we think it's true. And it was a big double take when I saw this, because, again, you then look closely and realize something's a little out of place. And, of course, it's not true at all in its construction.
Well, they called me like a month before the election. And they had a very abstract piece about state building and the Constitution and the abuse of the Bush reign of like the powers, Dick Cheney being as a vice president, so very important in all this. And it was a dry piece. They didn't want to have a political stand, and they realized they don't have any image for that, because if they show original president's photograph, they would show, you know, either Nixon, which is, you know, the GOP, or they would show a Democratic party, and they didn't want to get into that. They just wanted to have use the attention of everybody thinking about how should it be the next presidency, to kind of, you know, get a picture for that. And then they thought about me, which that was the trigger point for me to do it, because I only had like 3-4 weeks to do the whole thing, and 1 week I needed research because I never went there and I couldn't go there in that quick time. But then I just wanted to the fact that the biggest media, one of the biggest media outlets, or like printed kind of things which everybody knows and everybody sees, and where the photograph takes such a big role, would actually kind of get to me for an abstract commission like that. I thought on one hand, they understood what my project is, which is not about like, is it real or is it not real, with all due respect, but it's about like, how much do we need to kind of recognize something, and how can we make abstract versions of the same image? How abstract can photography be, or like, how can we push it away from the anecdotal kind of quality of a photograph? And so then I just basically made a hybrid, because all you need is like, the famous, wonderful half an hour advertisement by, that commissioned like half an hour by Obama shortly before the election, when he stands in some nondescript place with 3 windows behind, a desk in front, a desk behind. Do you think, and 2 chairs next to it, that's the White House. That's a paraphrase of the White House. It's like a theater stage, and everybody knows it's the most powerful place in the world. And that's all you need. And that's what I really kind of found quite interesting, that it's not about, and then I kind of went through all the archives, and I had a look what the carpet is by Clinton, the drapery is by George W. Bush, the chair is by the old Bush, and you just have the pictures. There's a great chance to smuggle some images on the back of the president's desk and stuff. But it was for me that the fact that they would come to me for this one, which was really the point why I
see the theory. Yeah. So I want to get to some questions from the audience. So maybe I'd just like to flip through a few things to show the range of things getting to the present, and then ask if there are some questions here for you. But your recent work has included, you've been doing these dailies, which are small digital photographs of things of interest.
Well, they're not digital. In fact, they're dye transfers, because that's a dyeing technique, and they basically snapshots with no narrative. There's no narrative other than being on the picture. So it's not about the White House. It's not about like whatever we have read before or something. It's just everything on the picture, and that's it. Yeah. So because like the ubiquitous, everybody has so many pictures on his phone, and the private image through Twitter and all the other Tumblr and all the other things, it gets so omnipotent that I thought like, this is probably photography today. The vast majority is actually kind of photographs of people, normal people exchanging funny photographs or something, and that I wanted to kind of do something with that quality, because and then at the same time they printed by somebody who was living in Seattle, and who is the last real true printer of these kind of fantastic old techniques of printing a color photograph. And as long as he would do it for me, I just thought like, I'd go for them. And they call dailies because
you're
it's
holding on to the handmade.
Well, no, but it's a mastership, which just you think like it's so easy now for everybody to print an inkjet print on something, and it looks fantastic. Every photograph on that screen looks fantastic. So because it's like backlit and all this, and so I thought like, just need, I the old quality of a photograph, which lasts forever because these dye transfers actually don't deteriorate, counterparted by just a moment, which is probably like a very personal idea of beauty or like incident or something, which is just, that's why they call the dailies, like a haiku, like a very simple observation, but kind of put into a form which lasts much longer than the observation itself lasts. So,
it's that, and I think that's the moment that it gets extended. I was so surprised, and then it seemed so obvious when I saw your photographs of architectural models, and in this case, these Lautner models that were shown here. And of course, for the man who makes cardboard models of architecture to then turn the camera on cardboard models of architecture seems so obvious. These are, in retrospect, I guess, so beautifully abstract and seem to be your own visual meditation. I see this self-reflexivity somehow of, I don't know if it's possible, you're looking at yourself and your own practice by looking at these other imaginations of buildings by Lautner or other architects. Is that going too far to say?
No, totally. That's totally the reason. But the thing is, if I have these moments in the studio, you have them all the time. But if you photograph your own little side and corners of studios, then you just it's like a hall of mirrors. And with the Lautner models, it allowed me to also being a Getty scholar and like having access to things, amazing things, but amongst them these models which nobody ever can see because they're so frail. I thought, I can probably, by detouring through other people's models, I can show something of the quality of what I actually don't think I should be photographing in my own place. Because it's, then it would be all about self-reference, which is not interesting really. So, and then, like even a piece of paper, which kind of somebody ripped off a model is becoming significant in this sense.
Yeah, no, they have that quality. And of course, because they're worn and they're old, I think of these as stand-ins for what would happen to your models over time should you have kept these objects. I guess the Grotto will be kept and some others, and this looking closely, which then some of these were shown. This was the Architecture Biennale and have been shown in other museum circumstances. And I want to bring us to this picture, kind of ending control room from 2011, which we acquired for LACMA, which is the Fukushima control room of the nuclear reactor where the meltdown was. And I think, we talked about this once. We haven't talked about any of this other before, but once we talked about that idea that you made that Pacific sun and the motion is sort of ambiguous, and I guess it's harmless. Right? Because nobody gets harmed. It's a little bit funny even to see the slapstick, right? And then at the same time, so many other things just happened, like Fukushima, and then you make this control room. And so I love the fact that we have these two images, one of which is very ambiguous, almost slapstick humor, and this one, which is, haunting and terrifying, of looking at this empty control room with the ceiling panels down. Again, this chaos. It takes us right back to the photograph, that first one of breaking into the attempted murder of Hitler, and that somehow in this chaos lurks all of these possibilities. And I guess we started reading, and I think Stephanie said this too very clearly, Stephanie Barron, we were talking about you reread Pacific Sun in a different way given what's happened historically. So the reverse of you focusing on a historic image, history has imposed itself, I think, sometimes on your more abstract images, if that's possible.
In this one, it's also like it's a photograph which everybody has seen. Also, like it's a normal GE built these kind of nuclear plants all over the place. And so it's not even like that it's only looking like this in Fukushima, but the ceiling comes down and the ceiling and nobody ever looked at it or like said anything. I never read a line about, look at the ceiling or something, because otherwise it looks actually all okay because it's built for an earthquake. It's built to withstand an earthquake. The only thing is like they couldn't see anything on the dial. So these photographs come from people which trying to stop the meltdown, knowing that they probably die from radiation, from exposure to radiation, but and they send photographs with a cell phone to their people, and they give it to the newspaper. And like 2 or 3 days later, TAPCO circulated these photographs, but like they put the ceiling out, they retouched it with an older photograph where everything was fine. And so the metaphor of like this, the artificial sky coming down is obviously, the artificial sun. Nuclear power is the artificial sun. Just to put it, and you don't need much to show this, it's the impact on that, and such an overlooked detail, I thought, which is so amazingly profound. At the same time, it is very beautiful, and it makes the otherwise not demolished place it puts it into the narrative I needed for this. Yeah. And these are next to that's just details which I had, because basically, it's also when you finish something, it's also quite, it has a very resolved quality in every aspect. And that's why I put it next, basically to impress you all.
I have a hard time believing you just destroy these things once you've made them, but we have the photograph. I would like to ask for some questions, and while people are thinking about few questions they might ask, I wanted to end with this one film again, a moving image that I thought was very beautiful and abstract to touch on that theme.
Yeah, these are candy wrappers, like a stop motion animation again. Candy wrappers, like from like the clear.
These are candy. I didn't realize this. So these are candy wrappers in stop action that appear like with the soundtrack as.
It's like boiling eggs.
As rain.
No, yeah, in a pan.
Oh, in a pan.
Frying eggs. And it's done in Lithuania at that time. Again, like 3 weeks, 24 hours, like doing these things, and you can't forget one. And then shot through 8 levels of glass, where you just move the raindrops down, because of course the eye kind of puts them together. You see the rain when you have the drops coming down the lines. It's basically like, between the camera and the table where we did this, like we have 8 layers of glass and we move strips of transparent paper, like tracing paper downwards. And the reflection is changing throughout the film because it needs to be wet. And that's basically one scene of like a Joris Evans film called Rain from 28, where somebody jumps over a puddle. And in the back you see willows, moving from the wind. And that's what I projected on the top of that table as a short animation. So you basically have the reflection and blah, blah, blah. So, you just have to, if you have too much time at the hand, you just come up with these things.
Yeah, I really think you have to spend more time on your artwork because...
Anyways, any questions?
Way too sketchy. So, perhaps there are some questions. And everyone must see the exhibition at Matthew Mark's gallery. This is one of the works that has a very nice poetic resonance for me to leave you with in relation to the Pacific Sun film. So perhaps there are a few questions from out there. I know we've covered a lot of territory, and we could probably speak here for hours about these aspects of your work. Oh, what we can't see. What's on the? So I guess the opposite side.
No, the objects are all done as objects. They're sculptures. I consider them sculptures as well. But sometimes I'm running out of time. So the backside of a table of the control room, for instance, the backside would be open because I just kind of have to finish it. Things get to fall into pieces. But the books, the handles, everything I make them as objects also because I want to take them serious as a sculpture, first place, and then, but they're not dummies, and the perspective is like it's a real place. It's never kind of I'm not trying to kind of fake perspective or depth of field or something like that. You learn to love your mistakes, so to say, it's just like it's if they're too perfect, the gods will be angry basically. So I'm trying to keep the decision making is not like can I go so meticulously in detail that it looks like the real thing. It's like where do I stop, and how much do I have to give to the picture until it's actually complete enough to kind of be what it's supposed to be. But then I'm trying to, I very often have like seams and like lines and like things which, like if I could show you, it's full of mistakes, but I want to have that texture of it's being made, I'm not trying to trick you or something. So it should be a picture, it should be an image as like, in its own right, but it doesn't need to, it's not Madame Tussauds, for instance. And I'm trying to keep it at that level where it's kind of at the same time it's flimsical. So, and if you look long enough at it, you just kind of it deconstructs itself in front of your eye because you realize how it's made. It's like a Magritte painting. Magritte is not a great painter, but he paints exactly as much as you need to kind of actually see what he wants to say with that. And that's for me kind of the guidance, what I need to, how far I go with this. Is that answering your question? Good.
So the question is, the schoolhouse, which is based on memory, is that a unique circumstance? Is that, James, that's the question. Is that unique, or are there a lot of others that are really based on memory? I think we talked about how some of them are not quite right and are composites, but
well, that's why in the beginning, like together with the company building that nuclear plant, those were basically coming. I read Bertrand Russell at the time, and simply about like how do we philosophical classifications? How do we know what's a table? Do we know what's a table because we grew up with one table and then we think we abstract from that one table to all the other tables, or is it because it basically fulfills a certain purpose and then it becomes a table? How do we kind of philosophically actually make that abstraction? And so I thought, can I actually build from memory? Like if I have that one table which trained me in the beginning, like to recognize all the other tables, what would be the table? Well, what would be the staircase? What would be, the diving board, for instance, in my life, which kind of trained me to kind of go from there to all the other ones to actually recognize them. And there is a kind of a number of works before, 6 or 7, which I usually kind of would start, showing them as my part of my, way to what I do. And then I just rebuilt that one destroyed room, and that changed the whole game because I realized that actually there's a tautological circle being closed by having a photograph being a memory at the same time as it's a photograph of someone else, and then you just you close up. There is something clicking, and then there's also no way back. When it clicks, and you can't say, "Oh, okay, then I do the garage of my childhood or something." And, then you just realize that you just suddenly you put your finger in the socket, and that's what was a very important point for me, and not good to go back then from memory. And then you realize that you don't even need a real picture to be related to a picture with the clearing you saw, the forest, because we have all these pictures of these inspirational pictures in front of our inner eye that we recognize them as exactly what they're supposed to do as a common memory, as a shared memory.
I don't know if everybody heard that, but I think the essence of the question is about, given the content about tsunamis and earthquakes and these things, is not having people being confused about that or questioning that.
I think it's 2 questions at the same time. I'm happy to answer both, but like, if you look at a photograph, and I had said this before, so in case you haven't heard it, you just check out your cell phone. But if you see a photograph of a library, or if you see these 2 chairs without us, you have the situation of a podium, and you know how to read that place, but like it also objects describe the social circumstances to which this would lead. If you have a photograph of us 2 with the same furniture, it's Michael Govan and me talking to an audience on, what is it, February the 24th or 25th or something. So the anecdotal reading of a photograph with people is a very good thing, but like, I'm not after the anecdotal reading. I'm just after the idea of the space, the idea of a photo of objects, how they describe our life. And the Pacific Sun is objects making a movement on their own, being forced by by forces of nature, or whatever you kind of whatever you think of how the movement is caused. But I had to kind of make it a wave. Of course it's a little tricky because you don't see the people always anticipate the movement. You just you would bend over first before anything else is just starting to move. So I needed to kind of replace that idea of anticipation. Well, you know what I mean, like with something moving, and there's 2 lamps.
The lamp does that.
Lamps, the 2 lamps which dangling around, which you would obviously never see on a boat, because like then you would never see your food. But like they dangling, and they always and then there's a milk carton in the front in the sink, which is also moving a little ahead of the rest, because like the water in there, which is tracing paper, is just actually moving alongside a little bit earlier than everything else. And so I needed these 2 movements to kind of basically get the idea of the movement because they replace people. And then many objects replace what the people do. There's a lady which kind of wants to leave and then hits the column in the middle. Now I have a plant which does exactly the same and then falls down and circles around. And we have the mop trolley, and we have there are stand-ins for the object, for the people doing something. But the bigger question is, of course, the film took me like 3 years to make it. And then in the middle, the tsunami happened in Japan, and I thought, is this really a good idea to do this? Because now what I thought is a slapstick thing becomes this actually really heavy loaded, boats flying through the air, basically. And then the Costa whatever happened, the boat kind of rammed into an island in Italy. That happened as well, and 4 people died and all this. And you just realize that the picture you work with gets exposed to history, even because you're so slow with the process before you can even finish it, And so, of course, you ask yourself, is that okay to do it, or is it not okay to do it? And I have to say, in the end, I don't say much about the disaster. I say something about the fact that we share information about the disaster. And that would kind of be actually also valid for the other two incidents I was talking about, that we know about immediately when the boat hits that cliff. We know about that, and we hear about this, and we have the pictures to that, and we know, oh, boats, we forgot about boats. Boats are really dangerous. Or if we have this, and even like the tsunami, the coverage of the tsunami had a certain moment of slapstick, which is just not, it wasn't about, you didn't want to laugh about it, but when you see the guy who drives through and then the big waves kind of goes over him and he goes with a little minivan, or like now with the plane, that you see the taxi driver who kind of drives through and the plane kind of hits in Taiwan on the highway. So you see these things and they go viral and everybody wants to see them because you just think like, wow, I would have never seen it otherwise. And that is probably, the Mona Lisa is not about a woman in Lombardia. The Mona Lisa is about the painting of a woman of Lombardia, and you just always have to keep these two things apart from each other. I'm not talking about the tsunami because I don't have anything to say about the tsunami. I can only talk about the picture which got to me and connected me to a very bigger, very global incident.
And Thomas, I think that question of people, just for me too, you've been true to this idea of the photograph as a document because you can tell what it's made of. You're not hiding the seams. And so this reality is there of the document of the photograph, but by virtue of your photographing something made and something empty, I think what we have to always remember is all that you trigger the interior, you trigger memory of a person, of our individual, and this collective memory. And this photograph that's externalized is such a powerful document of the internal. It's an image of the internal, and I think that is very people-related about us. So I thank you for your work, and thank you all for being here and being so patient to see it. So thank you.